Hey, Matt here. Today we're going to be reviewing this 3D printed track saw hinge. While track saw hinges are mainly used with MFT tables, I primarily use mine in the workshop to allow me to get repeatable cuts, and it helps keep the track stored away so that it's not in the way all the time, and allows me to easily just drop it down, make a cut, and move forward. If you've looked at track saw hinges before, you'll notice that they're not super economical. They range in the $300 to $400 price point. Depending on where you live and where you're getting it from too, you have to factor in shipping as well. Since I didn't want to shell out that much money right away to even see if I liked it or not, I found this 3D printed track saw hinge on Etsy. It's made by Luke in the Garage. Thought I would give this one a try. The Etsy store sells the STL file that you need to 3D print the track saw hinge, so you will need a 3D printer in order to get this track saw hinge. I did have my brother print this out for me, so I can't totally speak for how the print actually went. I do know that he did just have one misprint, and I believe that was just from the filament that he was using. I believe overall it went pretty smoothly. Once it's printed out, it's a pretty simple design. You have the front plate and back plate that you attach to your workbench that has plenty of screw holes to attach them to. You then have the front receiving end of the track saw that is attached to there, and then you use a bolt to tighten that down. For the back of the hinge, you have these two parts that create the hinge, as well as a printed bolt. I don't know what you would call this. I guess it's a bolt that you tighten. And the threads are set so that you can't over tighten it. And it does stick a little bit, but I have found that if you sand down some of the rounded edges here, that helps out a little bit. But again, once the weight of the hinge is pulling it, you don't notice it as much. You do need these micro jig match fit accessories so that you can bolt the track saw on to this base plate here. Links for all the products talked about today will be down in the description below. But with all these printed out, and the cost of these and the cost of the STL file from Etsy, it came to around $60. I believe it was around $30 for the 3D printed filament, $15 for these, and then $10 for the STL file. If you're like me and have a small shop and want to see more small shop ideas and furniture builds, make sure to hit that subscribe button to follow along. Setting it up on your workbench is pretty easy and straightforward. You do need to make sure you have a square workbench, or at least a square top. So my workbench top is perfectly square, the bottom not so much. So I reference the top of this workbench to square it up properly. For your workbench, you can find where you want that track saw hinge to lie down. Then from there, you just measure from the edge of your workbench in, and you keep both base plates the same exact distance, and then from there they'll match up. You'll also want to make sure that plate is flush with your workbench. So I just used a piece of plywood to make sure that it's nice and flush against the top of the workbench. When you're attaching these, don't forget to make sure you add that bolt in, because you need to have that in there before you fully attach that plate. And then from there, you add on each of the respective front and back pieces. Then you can add in your track saw and screw those match fit accessories down. If you're referencing just the top of your workbench like I did, you do want to make sure that there is something else that you can screw it into below that as well, just to add more stability to it. I added shims to help keep it flat along the workbench, since my workbench is not super straight. One thing I did decide to do was keep my track long. This is the 55-inch track, and I kept it long because I didn't want to cut it down and then have multiple tracks. I wanted to keep just the two, so I have two 55-inch tracks for my track saw. One that's attached to the hinge, and then one that's just stored away. That way I can always use this one for the most part, but then use it for my when I need to break down plywood as well. That way I don't have multiple tracks laying around here. Since it is 3D printed, there is a little bit of sway in the hinge, and you can feel it when you're bringing the track down. I have not seen an issue with this yet, especially since there's this locating pin on the front part of the hinge. That way it keeps the track saw straight every time you use it. Over time, this might increase as it just wears down since it's plastic and not made out of metal. I also use this track saw hinge in conjunction with my dog hole system. If you haven't seen that video where I set up all these dog holes, you can check it out here. These dog holes allow me to get perfectly 90-degree cuts since these are referenced off the same straight edges on my workbench top. So I can use these dog hole accessories wherever I want to give me a perfectly 90-degree cut, whether it be a larger piece or a smaller piece. If you don't have the dog hole system, I would recommend building a fence or something that you can butt your workpieces up against to get that 90-degree cut. This track saw hinge has actually impressed me more than I thought it would. I was kind of hoping that I would have an excuse to buy one of the name brand track saw hinges, but this one seems to work out just fine for me. The track saw hinge also comes with this flip up feature that allows you to rest your track on an elevated spot to move around your workpiece. I haven't actually used it very much at all, but some others might find this useful. One thing I don't like is this receiving notch does not allow you to go flush with the workbench. I wish it would drop down a little bit lower, that way it would sit flush and I could use my workbench as an assembly table since this is such a small workshop. It does get in the way when I'm moving around boxes or any of my other projects. Another thing that's kind of a pain is reaching behind the workbench to adjust the height. This is nothing wrong with the actual track saw hinge. I know all the others you have to do the exact same. Currently I just use wing nuts. I should probably switch away from these to get a bigger knob on there, but it's just something to keep in mind when adding the track saw hinge. With the cost to buy the files and print the actual product out, you could have a good excuse to purchase that 3D printer that you've always been wanting. So overall, I'm very impressed with this 3D printed track saw hinge. Again, we'll see how it goes in a year from now, if it holds up to the constant wear and tear, but it's working out great for me. And that about wraps it up. Thanks for watching, everyone, and I'll see you on the next one.